Alright, so this is where we ended in our last section notes in part 2, so we're going to move our way into part 3. And just as a reminder, again, we were just finishing up with the pancreas, talking about how the pancreas, its main job is to secrete enzymes. One important enzyme that we've talked about, and we might know somebody that has a disease with it, and that's the secretion of insulin, and that disease we all know as diabetes. Now here's this section. If you really zoom in on it, you're thinking, well, where the heck is this at? Here's your pyloric sphincter. So this is the base of the stomach in here. And so the food is going to be mixed down. It's going to work its way through that pyloric sphincter into this first section called the duodenum or the duodenum. Now, duodenum is only this in length. It's a tiny, tiny section of the small intestine. But it's super, super important because what's going to actually happen here is you have the secretions of some of the primary enzymes in this spot. Now here you're going to actually see coming from the green guy, the common bile duct. Now this green guy is the gallbladder. Its main job is just to basically house excess bile. Now bile is actually made up here from the right and left lobes of the liver. Now the liver is actually going to be making it and secreting it down this tube. Now excess of it is going to be stored in the gallbladder. Now the other organ over here, this highly vascularized organ, is that of the pancreas. Its main job is to secrete enzymes through these little sphincters. Now, this is the major one, the sphincter of Oddi, I believe is what it's called. But it's a hepatopancreatic sphincter. What it's going to end up doing is going to empty down into this first section, where it's going to be the very beginning, can help break down those nutrients that we just had broken down in the stomach even further for more absorption. Now, if you take a look at the little folds within inside here, you'll see talk about those in a little bit. The plica circularis. But what its job inside there is actually to, let's go back real quick, is inside there, there's tiny little finger-like projections that are going to be used to start the absorption of all those nutrients known as the villi. But let's move our way back up into that liver and understand what that does. Liver is the largest internal organ, so the largest internal organ. It is reddish brown in color, located in the upper right-hand quadrant of your abdominal cavity. So you think of where that is located. And its main job is to help break down carbs, lipids, and proteins. Now, in terms of lipids, how it's going to help break it down is it's going to secrete bile. Bile is a surfactant. Surfactant, it really refers to something that helps de-emulsify or break down lipids. What it's going to help do is going to kind of spread it apart and break it down as quickly as possible for your digestive tract to either absorb it or to expel it and get rid of it. Another thing that your liver is going to do, its primary role is that of removing toxins. It filters out the blood, gets rid of red blood cells, foreign substances. It tries to get rid of all that excess stuff we don't need. Secretes, again, we mentioned that it secretes bile, that's shown there, and it's a fat emulsifier. Here's your quick illustration of your liver, your different lobes of the liver. So we have the left and the right. Each one's going to secrete their bile, and excess bile will be stored in that of the gallbladder, and the rest of it is going to be sent out into the first section of this small intestine, which again is the duodenum. Of your gallbladder, just a pear-shaped sac. Its main job is to just hold on to the bile, stores that bile. Now we can live without this guy. If this for some reason we get a whole bunch of cholesterol built in with inside of it, and as that bile isn't broken down, the excess cholesterol, it starts to crystallize inside of the gallbladder. That forms our gallstones. If it gets to a point where that gallstone cannot undergo peristalsis and force its way out through one of the common bile duct, it might end up giving you what's called a gallbladder attack. And, at times you might end up having to get your gallbladder removed. What that does mean, so if I can go back to one of our next slides, is that if this guy is not there at all, the bile that we do secrete from the liver will go straight down and just empty continuously from the liver down into that of the small intestine. Alright, so here's just taking a quick peek at that again. Empty it in the first section of the small intestine, which is the duodenum. From there, we'll work our way into then of the jejunum. But of the small intestine, the three different sections we've mentioned in this, the duodenum or the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. The three different sections, the longest of those sections being the ileum, which is the last portion of it, And the first section is the duodenum, which is the smallest of those, which is going to be where those accessory organs, the gallbladder slash liver, are going to secrete bile, and then that the insulin is going to be secreted along with some other pancreatic juices from the pancreas into the duodenum. Now, the main job of the small intestine is to absorb. Absorb, absorb, absorb. And now what's going to do that through are little finger-like projections known as villi. Now it's approximately 10 feet in length, and throughout that entire length of time, its main job is to hold on. Why is it so long? The longer it is, the more chances of actually getting food caught up into it and working its way throughout that small intestine and getting absorbed. Now, if you can take a look, you've got the bloodstream here. All these little vessels from the mesentery, which is this little shiny little projection, are going to absorb all those nutrients from the villi just by simple diffusion, absorb those materials and work its way back into the bloodstream. And now in the bloodstream, it's then going to be pumped throughout the rest of the body so every one of your cells can get the nutrients they need to absorb. So here's just a quick illustration of the mesentery just to help suspend small intestine. But look at this villi. Here are the bloodstream. The villi are those little finger-like projections. So if I got a food particle, some chyme, liquid portions of food that are within here, not only than here, then they fall down these little cracks and they're working their way all the way throughout the small intestine. Now, all of these individual cells, you can take a really zoom in on those cells. Let's do this. Kind of really zoom in on some of those cells. Each one of these little boxes is their own cell. They all need the nutrients, so they need the sugar so they can make all of the ATP. They need the blood to give them plenty of oxygen. So if I'm looking at here, oxygen needs to get to those cells so they can make ATP. All right? When you zoom back out, not only every one of those cells need it, but every cell in the human body needs it. So smaller. All of these nutrients need to be pushed throughout the entire body, and it's going to be absorbed by simple diffusion into this bloodstream. Now that lymph vessel, that is just kind of a garbage collection, anything waste products, what have you, can get into there and get kind of destroyed. But the blood is then going to take all those nutrients that are absorbed at that site, and it's going to be pumping it throughout the entire body. Well, one last thing, if you remember going back to the tissue level that we talked about at the very beginning of this class, we talked about simple columnar epithelial. You look at these guys, why do I want it simple? One layer. So I can absorb the nutrients as quickly as possible. Columnar, these elongated type cells. Then again, it's the outer covering, so it's an epithelium. So it's going to be one layer so that nutrients can absorb very, very quickly. Here's just looking at your amount of villi throughout. Not only do you see this plica circularis, the circular muscles all the way around, but in every single one of them, you've got these little finger-like projections throughout the entire thing. Each of those finger-like projections are villi. So not only do you have a circle, this tube that food is going to travel out through, now I can increase the surface area with all these little finger-like projections all the way throughout it. So not only do I have a surface area of about 10 feet in length, now I can increase that surface area with all those villi to about the size of a singles tennis court. So huge amounts of surface area that can be increased to absorb as much nutrients as I possibly can. Not only is it the 10 feet, but the longer it can stay in there, the better chances of absorbing everything I need. What happens if I can't absorb anything else? Or what happens if the migrated motor complex pushes it down so fast that I'm not able to absorb it? Or maybe I get to the point where I've taken everything I possibly could. What next? Next, we move to this guy, large intestine. Its job is whatever cannot be absorbed, I work my way into this guy, and at the site of where the small meets the large, you're going to see here in a little bit, it's known as the cecum. That cecum, the ileocecal sphincter, is going to be that connection point where it starts the development of absorbing water and the formation of feces. What cannot be absorbed at that point says, well, if I can't absorb it, let's get rid of it. So at that point, that chyme, the liquidy portion of material, needs to take as much water and electrolytes as I possibly can. If you're having an issue where you're sending out your fecal material too quickly, there's excess water in your stool, which leads to diarrhea. Or you could have the opposite of that, is if you're holding on, you're taking too much water out of your stool, you have what's called constipation. Here I talk about three parts. There really actually you consider four parts to that of the colon. The colon is synonymous with large intestine. We have the ascending colon, where it's going to actually spend the majority of its time in ascending and transverse. Main jobs here is just going to be absorption of water. Now, majority of the time, we can actually see up to 24 hours, you could see the food actually staying in the large intestine. Now, your ascending colon is going to be on the right-hand side, the right-hand abdominal cavity. Food is going to work its way up. So just by sheer gravity, it's going to take longer. And then across in the transverse colon. Now we need to go down. Down is just kind of a conduit. This is the descending colon, just kind of the connection until it gets into the sigmoid, which makes kind of a little backwards S shape. That's your sigmoid colon, which is not mentioned there. Sigmoid colon, which is there, and eventually gets stored in the rectum and gets expelled then through the anus. Alright, here, bacteria is especially important. Bacteria can help digestion. Not only does it do that, but with the upper breakdown, we actually get vitamin K. Vitamin K is responsible for helping the development of blood platelets. So one of those things that we definitely need in our body. So here, if I take a look at the large intestine, again, you have mesentery, so you have absorption of water that can be brought into the bloodstream and then put throughout the entire blood system itself. Here, you have your connection point of your ileum and your cecum. Your cecum is the first section of your large intestine. It's called the ileocecal sphincter. So right in there, that small intestine, all that's in here, eventually what cannot be absorbed and goes into this section. So now this becomes our feces. Here we're going to have water being absorbed. It's going to go across the transverse, down the descending. Here's your sigmoid, and eventually stored in the rectum, eventually, and then expelled through that of the anus. So I'm taking a quick illustration of that. You can see a little bit better. You have your anal canal. One of the last things I want to mention on this illustration is this little finger-like projection there that's found at the base of the ascending colon. Remember, ascending, transverse, descending, sigmoid, and then rectum, anus. Okay, that little finger-like projection is known as your appendix, your vermiform appendix. Prehistorically, thought to digest wood. Really does nothing for us. Now, if we get stool impacted in there, if for some reason we get the orifice within there has feces within there and bacteria start to build up, it gets inflamed, you get an itis, or what we know as appendicitis, and they might end up having to go and get that removed. So an appendectomy is a common surgery that is used to remove an inflamed appendix that's in the lower right-hand quadrant of your body. A couple of the things that are shown here is the last parts of your rectum. Again, the rectum is just going to hold on, start to form the feces, and not only do you get both the coloration from breakdown of bile pigments as well as blood, but you have odors as well, so the help of the bacteria, the methane gas that you might develop from that bacteria. Anal canal, you have two different sphincters, one voluntary, one involuntary, just like your urethral sphincter. Once you get to the point where it's pushing its way through the involuntary canal on the anus, you get yourself in your little potty dance. You're like, yep, you need to go to the bathroom. You do control your voluntary sphincter, that skeletal muscle. It gets to the point where you're kind of doing your potty dance and you have to get to the bathroom because there's only so long you can hold that voluntary sphincter closed, just like that of the urethra. The urethra, when you have to urinate, you do the same type of thing. It goes through the involuntary sphincter, and then you can hold on. You get used to that ability of holding on through the voluntary skeletal muscle until at one point you can no longer hold it anymore, or you train yourself to hold that. All right. See, that is actually it for our notes and the digestive system. We're going to move our way into nutrition next. So this is the last section of digestion. Hopefully you have a good rest of your day.